Welcome back to the World Beyond Belief. This is episode 135. I'm Mindy Erkin, your co-host, and with me is Paul Marko.
Hi, nice to have you back. It's always good to have you join us on these journeys into the fringe. That's what it's going to be today as we dive deeper and deeper into the Hampstead child murder, child raping saga. Today we're going to find how we're connected with that entire scenario back there and just how deep the rabbit hole goes on this. Now, I'm sure we're not getting to the bottom of it, but this should take us about 20 feet deeper today if you stay tuned for both hours. This hour, we're going to talk about different connections that the child murder case Satanism thing has. Next hour, we're going to look at the ambient situation over there in Hampstead. So should be real interesting, and of course I'm going to speculate as to what might be going on with my own reasoning. But I think it's really important that we don't let this story go. This is probably, definitely the most important story in 2015. It's very important that we don't let it go, just if only for the kids' sake. But I think there's a couple other reasons. One, my most optimistic hope about this case is that people stay on top of it and we start picking apart this Satanist, pedophile, elite connection. I think if people realized before they go to the voting booth in the UK or the US or France or anywhere in the world they still have voting booths, that they haven't been replaced by a bureaucrat, that you realize that the people that they allow you to vote for are probably, highly likely, controlled because they're connected into this child sex satanic web. If everybody knew that, I think there would be a little change in the attitude. So that's my most hopeful outcome for this thing. Now, the suspicious part of me definitely comes out, especially with the information that I'm going to give you today. Is this whole thing a psyop? Are we being tricked into believing something? Or are they doing the tip of the iceberg thing, where they'll admit to and show the tip of the iceberg? I know it's hard to believe in this case, but, there's much, much more to be seen, but they'll let us see this much. Or do they want this whole thing to come out? Is this part of their converting us to Satanism, as we talked about in the last episode? So it's really hard to figure out which one of those it might be. But I think the most practical thing that we're staying on top of it for is for children. Not just those children, but all of our children. All of the children that are taken into custody by Child Protective Services, all the children that are watched daily 24/7 by the police in their schools and all around their neighborhoods. I think it's really important. Now, for those of you who weren't with us last week or the week before when we talked about this case, let me give you a quick overview. Back in September, or maybe it was in August, two children and their mother and their mother's boyfriend went on a trip to Marko. Well, during this trip, the children started displaying really strange behavior. The boyfriend noticed that they were touching themselves sexually and also touching a dog in a sexual way. So they started asking them about it. And the children started talking about what they had gone through in their school. Now, you can help me augment this, Mindy, if I leave anything out.
Okay.
It appears that on Wednesdays in this school, Christ Church School, every Wednesday they have Sex Day. And what Sex Day means is that a lot of the teachers and a lot of the parents come in and they have sex with the children. Mostly anal sex from what I could gather from the testimonies. And even the women that didn't have penises were able to simulate anal sex with dildos. And there's hours and hours of testimony by the children attesting to this fact. Now, for sex on Wednesday, they were given candies. They called them sweeties. And they were allowed to choose their favorite sweeties. And they were also given money. Because I think some of the parents, somehow how this works out, I'm not really clear, paid money to be involved in this orgy in the schoolhouse. Now, also during this orgy, they had babies. They had live babies that were brought in, and these babies were human sacrifices. They would cut the heads off the baby, turn them upside down, drain the blood, cook. I know this is grossing me out just saying it. Cook the meat. They'd use the skin, get this, for making shoes. All the members of this cult wore baby skin shoes. And while they would drink the blood and eat the baby's flesh, they would also dance with baby skulls, around the room. So it sounds pretty satanic to me. And so it's not unusual. Pedophilia in the elite in the UK is not unusual. I mean, you have to really be living in a mayonnaise jar not to understand how, not to know the story of Jimmy Savile or Leon Britton or Ted Heath. I mean, these are noted pedophiles, and it goes all the way up into the royal family. So to find this going on in Hampstead in England isn't a big strange thing, a great revelation to me. What it is, though, this is something that might break it wide open. I mean, this is my hopeful self talking. It's hopeful that these kids, being as candid as they were, could break it open and could save kids all around the world from having this same thing happen to them. So anyway, that's why I don't want to let it go, and I think it goes much, much deeper, and I think you'll find that out if you stick with us during this 2 hours. While I was thinking about this over the weekend, I was wondering how incredibly emasculated, and I mean that in a general unisexual way, how generally emasculated we've gotten as a population that we don't take matters into our own hands, that we trust the government, which in this case are all in on it, to do our bidding for us, and we don't stand up and do anything about it. And my mind switched to the mob scene in Frankenstein.
Ludwig, you will search the woods. Those are your group. Herr Frankenstein, you will take to the mountains. Those are your people. I will lead the third group by the lake. Remember, get him alive if you can, but get him. But search every ravine, every crevice, but the fiend must be found. Are you ready? Light your torches and go.
Yeah, I wondered when we stopped turning into a mob that would administer justice. At one point, was it in the 1880s when we just let it go? When you find out that your children, your boy children, your girl children are being raped and you don't do anything about it now? When did we stop doing something about it? I think in the 1920s. Those guys were really tough guys back then. I don't think they'd allowed something like this to happen. But now, I haven't heard of anything that's going on in that community. I would think that some type of a mob, now this was an aggressive mob, which which feels good but may not be appropriate. I think maybe a non-compliance mob might be more of something that the doctor ordered in this particular case. And I'm thinking that everybody that's a child in Christchurch school should at least do an anal exam on that child. Am I crazy?
Least. But a lot of reason why nothing's being done is because so many of the parents of these children are actually in on it. Or one member of the family, like in the case of these children, it was just the father and the mother was not. Could be the same for many of the other families.
But there's got to be a few families. Do you think all the parents in that church are screwing their children?
They could be.
50%?
Maybe 75%.
Maybe 75%. Well, there's got to be 25% of the parents who are could be doing butt checks on their children.
Right.
All right. Also, the schools nearby. I mean, they're implicated in the thing too.
Right. I thought this was the Hampstead school, but they're all involved. Well, there were 3 or 4 that were mentioned as being involved.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. He went to Christchurch Elementary.
Okay.
Is what he did. He went from Piper Pan Day School. I read that. I read the whole write-up. So anyway, everybody from the surrounding area should be doing butt checks on their kids and maybe taking them to a doctor. If there's a doctor you can check, you can trust around there to do a rectal exam. I'm not even sure, but that should be the minimal. And if there's any damage, like was done to these 2 children, I think that uniting with other parents and pulling your kids out of school, making some type of a major protest, I don't mean standing around, but withdrawing your tax money from the schools or do something overtly, but nothing. You don't hear anything. That makes me feel like you're really correct that this might be deeper and more prolific than we think about it. And the mob isn't forming because everybody's with Frankenstein. Nobody's with the mob anymore. Nobody does it. So now I've been watching what's coming out on the internet about the kids.
Well, I have a thought about that.
Go ahead.
We didn't talk about this before, but the fluoride that's put in the drinking water in the U.S., I don't know if they do it in the U.K., it makes you docile. It makes you not in action. You're docile. You don't really take action like forming community with other people in a non-compliant mob.
Well, you're dumbed down. You're also taking GMOs. You're also watching television, which is a total mind control device. And there can be a myriad of other reasons why they're not doing it. The fact is, they're not doing it.
They're not doing it, and this is their children.
This is their children.
I mean, how close does it have to get before you stand up and say, no, I'm not doing this anymore.
Right.
I'm not playing this game.
Right. But nothing's happening. And I'm afraid that even the alternative broadcasting companies, the alternative media are not following up and staying on top of this thing. And it's the most important thing because of those reasons I mentioned before in the beginning of the program. It's really important that we stay on top of this. What reports I have seen seem to question the veracity of the children's statements. Now, I don't know whether I've watched a lot of children, and to me, they seem totally credible from the beginning. But I've heard a comment from some people that the girl, Elisa, when she makes her comments, or when she was making her comments to the original police detective story, before the kids recanted. The kid says it's all false and da-da-da-da-da.
That was after they were taken by protective custody.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
But before then, Elisa was very candid with the police officer, but she used hand gestures. And somebody on the internet was saying that, oh, these hand gestures are often used by a deceiver because they distract from the message. Now, how a 9-year-old girl is going to get that information, why she would get that information, this was horrible for these children. They got taken away from their family. I mean, only bad things happened when they did this. They weren't being cool. It wasn't a loving gesture. They were scared, and they talked about their fear during their interviews. So, but they did talk about the veracity of the children's statement, and while they were saying that, my mind flashed back to the 1970s when I was involved with a technique called Neurolinguistic programming. I was with a company. They were interested in using this technique. It was called NLP. It's still called NLP, but it's a much more sophisticated study now. It's not like it was in the 70s. In the 70s, it was just starting out. I think I read the original book on the subject I believe it was called From Frogs to Princes. And I remember a couple of the techniques, and they seemed pretty slick. The one that I know that works well on if you want to find out whether somebody's telling the truth or they're imagining something. Here's how it works. If you look at somebody straight in the eye and you tell them to imagine something, their eyes will go up to one side. I think normally to imagine something you go to the left, but it could change. When you ask them to remember something, they go to the right. Now, anybody could be wired differently, so they could go to the right for one and go to the left for the other. But all you have to do to get a registration on which side they go to for each type of reference is to ask them a question. Remember what we had for lunch? And they'll go up to the remembering side. Now you'll know that the imagining side is on the other side.
Oh, that's really good to know. So you don't have to remember and be accurate. You can test it as you use it.
Right. You just ask them a question where they're remembering something, and they'll go.
It's not the same for everyone, so you have to actually.
Well, yeah. There's a dominant one, like it's right-handedness is the dominant, but there's some left-handed. So,
I get you.
Okay. So you could do that when you're watching it, and the child Gabriel. Well, I think Elisa too. You can get enough registration on their eye to tell whether they're lying or not, because what'll happen is there are certain things that they're obviously remembering. They'll go up to their remembering side and then watch to see if they go up to their imagining side for the other. When I watched it, they always went up to the remembering side. But you check it out and you see if that works. I've used that actually myself, and it seems to work pretty well. There's another neurolinguistic programming thing I can tell you. Now, I've never tested this one, but this was in the book, and this is the only two things I remember from a book I read in the 70s. You can imprint somebody's emotion by touching them physically. In other words, if somebody's having a strong emotion, like extreme happiness, joy, or they're at a funeral and they're having extreme sadness, you can have them recreate that emotion by imprinting the emotion on their body while they're doing it. In other words, let's say I'm at a funeral home and you're very sad, and I want to imprint that emotion on you. I can grab your hand and squeeze it very tightly, or squeeze your arm very tightly, or hug you very tightly. It'll imprint that emotion on your body.
Does it have to be like an excessive touch? Like just a touch on the shoulder, for example, wouldn't do it?
No.
It would have to be kind of a squeeze?
Yeah, it's got to be
something that someone would actually notice,
right,
because it wasn't ordinary to be touched that way.
Right.
I get you.
Therefore, after that, and I don't know what the extinction rate is on this, I don't know how long it lasts. If you touch them in that way, hug them that way, they'll go back into the sadness. Now,
we should try that with joy. and see if it works, because then if we needed to bring forth some joy when it wasn't there, I could just squeeze your shoulder and you'd feel joyful again. We'll experiment.
Yeah, what we should do is the next time we're really, next time we win the lottery or something like that,
Yeah,
that we're
right.
really jumping around here happy about, we should give one another a big, long hug. That way, 2 days later, when we're moping because we've already pissed away the lottery money, we can give one another a long, slow hug, and it'll bring us right back. So anyway,
I like the plan.
okay. So we took a little detour into NLP, but I want to get back to the children and try to descend a little deeper into the rabbit hole. What's going on? What we're looking at right now are children, one school, looks like a Satanist cult, might be connected with other cults, but who knows? It has nothing to do with the military-industrial complex. It doesn't have anything to do with the Beatles. It doesn't have anything to do with electro swing music. It's just kind of like a little story we have. But as we get deeper and deeper, we see more and more unfold. I want to tell you that what I found out this week, that many of the parties involved were receiving services from the Tavistock Institute. Tavistock Institute, one of the buildings, is located right there in Hampstead. And that gives me a whole different notion of what's going on, since I know that I didn't even know that individuals could do something at the Tavistock Institute.
What do you mean do something?
Well, you think of people doing things at the YMCA or the community center, taking cooking classes or something like that.
Yeah.
No, the Tavistock Institute is supremely dark institute. It works with great big think tanks, and it runs things like the Air Force Intelligence Office, MIT. Big clients base their programs around concepts dictated, actually, by the Tavistock Institute. So the fact that people could go there. Now, I know that people can attend classes at things like Esalen Institute on the West Coast, and that's actually a Tavistock client also. But I didn't know that individuals could go, just drop in the neighborhood and take what kind of class would you take at the Tavistock Institute? Behavioral modification, traumatology, the art of studying the effects of trauma, psychological and physical. Those are the kind of things that the Tavistock Institute is interested in. It's a pivotal part of this story, the more I think of it, because, let me tell you something, the Tavistock Institute is a pivotal part of your life, and you'll understand that more as we get deeper and deeper in deconstructing a little bit of this Tavistock Institute. It was created in 1921, mostly for mind control, behavioral modification, culture creation, control, and mostly control through drugs. As I said before, they focus on traumatology. And actually, one of the first things they did, or one of the things they did during World War II, was to bomb an area to look at, study the people and how they responded to the traumatizing effects of bombs. I'll get into that a little bit later. The Tavistock Institute was set up by what they call the Committee of 300. The Committee of 300 is either made up of or it works directly for the 13 bloodline families. And we talk a lot about the bloodline, the fact that the bloodline families are basically satanic. They're basically half human, half some kind of demon spawn kind of thing. So that they do two things. One, they function in the underworld by allowing the demons access to their bodies of these bloodline families so they can experience certain things that they need to experience in the physical world, like child killing, raping children, all the satanic rituals that they do, the cremation of care ceremony that's done every year out at the Bohemian Grove. That's where the bloodline families become possessed by these entities that control them. And that's one function of the bloodline families. The other function of the bloodline families is to function on behalf of the demons. Tony Blair, David Cameron, Barack Obama, John McCain are bloodline family people that function in the physical world on behalf of the demons. That's why they're always creating wars, advocating GMOs, fluoriding water. Now they're disarming the American public. All these things are demonic activities carried out by these bloodline families. I mean, it seems clear to me, just in watching life, that that's what happens.
That's true. Well, you did say you were going to take our listeners deep into the fringe.
If you don't want to go into the fringe, you need not to listen to The World Beyond Belief. Anyway, so they study how to control people, and they work, well, I was going back to the Committee of 300 is what they're directly chartered by. And I'm not sure whether the Committee of 300 contains most of the bloodline families, representatives from the bloodline families, or it's the families below these particular bloodline families, the parapsychopathic families that are connected with these 13 bloodline families. But Tavistock definitely has a satanic lineage, and as we go through the kind of things that they do, you'll see how they're functioning on behalf of the satanic lineage in the real world. All right. They work through the University of Sussex. They do a lot of work with the Stanford Research Institute. Now, the Stanford Research Institute isn't Stanford University. It's a different deal. Stanford Research Institute was the one that did the study back, I think it was in the 60s or the 70s, where they took a group of college students and they divided them in half. Do you remember this?
Oh, yes. But go ahead and tell our listeners.
Okay,
They might not know that.
half of them were assigned to be prison guards and half of them were assigned to be inmates. And the prison guards were told that they could do anything they wanted to do to the inmates with no retribution. In other words, there was nothing that was going to happen to them as a consequence, so they could do whatever. Apparently, they had to stop the study within 24 hours because apparently they did whatever. They were doing unconscionable things to their fellow students, which had, 2 or 3 hours before been their comrades, their buddies. Now they were, God knows what they were doing, but they had to stop the study. It sounds like a Tavistock to me. It sounds like a Tavistock-inspired kind of study.
It does.
They also work with the Esalen Institute, which...
Well, the full name of the Tavistock Institute is the Tavistock Institute for Human Relations. Isn't that right?
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah, you can imagine what kind of human relations they're working with.
Humans' relations with the bloodlines, maybe. Human relations with one another, who knows?
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Back to the Esalen Institute. Now, this is an exclusive Hotsy-totsy California Institute. Now, the Esalen Institute brought a lot of really strange things over from George Gurdjieff from the Middle East. He's I'd say he's a satanic-related philosopher. Madame Blavatsky and her cadre of offspring through the Theosophical Society. They're responsible for creating the LSD culture, and I think that Terence McKenna, who was an admitted CIA operative, did a lot of its work at Esalen Institute. They also birthed movements like the EST movement. What was EST?
EST.
Is that the one that started Landmark?
Yes, EST was started by Werner Erhard, and it was later transformed to become Landmark Education.
Right. So a lot of this stuff, it's all about mind control. A lot of these New Age religions, we're going to do a lot of work on those in the coming up podcast, how the New Age religions are helping turn people toward Satanism. We did a podcast a little bit on it last week, but I didn't get into the New Age stuff. And I'm kind of an expert on the New Age religion simply because I fell for just about every one of them.
Yes, and your Ph.D. in transpersonal psychology pretty much gives you expertise in the land of New Age.
Oh, it immersed me. It's
materials.
It's an amazing thing. Also, the Esalen is connected with MIT, and I know some other deceptive agents that work for MIT. The Hudson Institute.
What is MIT? Massachusetts
Institute of Technology. They also work with the Hudson Institute, the Heritage Foundation. Now, these are think tanks. Now, when they tell you it's a think tank, what they mean is they're a group of people getting together to determine how they want to move you and the end goals that they want to have in mind. That's what a think tank does. I've never heard, and I could be wrong, and you can send me an email, there might be think tanks started by people who are working for peace or people who are working for human consciousness expansion that are looking in the other directions. But all the think tanks I know are basically control-oriented, crowd control-oriented. Also, they're connected with the Center for Strategic and International Studies at Georgetown. All diplomats from the U.S. and probably from all the NATO countries have to go through this course to become a diplomat. In other words, they want to brainwash you into what you can do, what you can't do, and they want to let you know how under their thumb that they are. They also work for the Air Force Intelligence Agency. And that, of course, is the agency that's created all the internet shills. If you put a video on the internet, then it's a great video and it's really going to help people, and there's 25 people right up front tell you that it's worthless and it's way out there and it's not going to go anyplace. They're probably shills. They probably are computer programs programmed by the U.S. Air Force. They have what they call sock puppet software, which are people that really aren't people that interface and sway social media. Really, well, anyway, let's move on. The RAND Corporation is a think tank. It's a product of the Tavistock Institute. I think everybody knows about the RAND Corporation. Anytime on the mainstream media, they want to predict the future or program you to think that something's going to happen, they'll say a prediction made by the RAND Corporation. The RAND Corporation is there like, oh my God, these are the most intelligent people working with these dynamite computers. And yeah, what it is, it's a Tavistock Institute directed way to control your behavior. Simple as that. The Mitri Corporation, which is totally in charge of manipulating or involved in manipulating media and social media. They're all interconnected with Tavistock. The Wharton School of Economics is also is tightly connected with Tavistock. And we never have any trouble with the economics throughout the world. It's always working out for the best of the people involved, you know. I'm sure that the Tavistock's Institute there is how are we going to rob everybody and not get them to form Frankenstein mobs and mob the castle? How are we going to do that? Tavistock, you need Tavistock around to let you know that. Now, reading about Tavistock, and I'm going to plan on doing more reading, but so far what I've been able to glean is that there would be no World War I or World War II without Tavistock. They were instrumental in shaping the mindset that put us into those wars. There would have been no Bolshevik revolution, which ended up killing, hundreds of millions of people by starving them to death. There would be no war in Korea. There would be no Cold War. The Cold War, of course, was a device. It was probably a device thought up by the Tavistock Institute to keep the military-industrial complex in big bucks while we were going through the place when we didn't have a war. That's how they work things.
Uh-huh.
Vietnam, wouldn't have had Vietnam, wouldn't have the Serbian conflict, wouldn't have had the hippie movement, which, by the way, was called by them the Aquarian conspiracy. We wouldn't have had the Iraq War, definitely wouldn't have had the Iraq War. They definitely had to orchestrate us there. Wouldn't have had Pearl Harbor. Probably wouldn't have had rock and roll. Definitely wouldn't have had the Beatles. Wouldn't have had the CIA. Wouldn't have had MI6 or MI5. The whole idea is most of what you think of as your past, most of what you remember, if it had something to do with community, culture, government, international relations, it was probably orchestrated by Tavistock. And Mindy and I were sitting around last night, having been really immersed in Tavistock for a while, thinking that there may not be too many things in our lives that weren't orchestrated by the Tavistock. Tavistock Human Relations. I mean, we really fell for the hippie movement. We were educated by the public schools. They're certainly totally controlled by the Tavistock Institute. And we watched TV growing up. TV and that media certainly all controlled. What we saw, what we were able to put into our brain was controlled by the Tavistock Institute.
Mm-hmm. And later, when we thought that we were rejecting all the traditional areas of our youth, and we sought out alternative sources of information, much of that came through the Esalen Institute by way of Tavistock. So
right.
Everything in our entire life has been orchestrated by Tavistock.
Right. It's hard to think
We
of.
are a Tavistock creation.
I would say that's true. Let me read a little bit more from an article about the Tavistock Institute. Now, it started in England, but it moved to the United States. Part of it, it's all over the world, believe me, but part of it's in the United States. Let me start reading. When you think Tavistock, think evil, mind control, anti-human. The ideology of American foundations was created by the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London in 1921. Its purpose was to establish the breaking point of men under stress, under the direction of the British Army Bureau of Psychological Warfare, commanded by Sir John Rawlings Rees. Rawlings Rees was the main, founder of Tavistock. Its prophet was Sigmund Freud, and he settled in Mansfield Gardens when he moved to England. He was given a mansion by Princess Bonaparte, so he would stay there and work. He was interested in controlling human behavior when he was there. A network, Tavistock spawned a network of secret control groups. The Mon Pelerin Society, the Trilateral Commission. Any person who's listened to the World Beyond Belief knows a lot about the Trilateral Commission. The Ditchley Foundation, and the Club of Rome. Of course, the Club of Rome is the one that came up with global warming, the global warming hoax. And it was probably a product of Tavistock.
Sure.
So all the...
That's an amazing psyop, the global warming hoax. It lets everything play into the hands of Agenda 21.
Right. It's the precursor for Agenda 21, and I'm sure the Sharpies at the demonic Sharpies at Tavistock thought it up. Tavistock Institute
Don't
developed...
you just picture them like rolling on the ground laughing at
Oh, I do.
the effects of their work?
Oh, man, can you imagine after they decided how to dress the hippies?
And how about the kids, I don't know, in our children's generation with their pants hanging halfway down their legs?
Right. Or now the women with the pants so tight they all sport camel toes around. I mean, they've got to be rolling on the laughing just on fashion alone, let alone getting us to do things like going to war. It's amazing. Back to my reading. Tavistock Institute developed the mass brainwashing techniques which were first used experimentally on American prisoners of war in Korea. Its experiments in crowd control methods have been widely used on the American public. A surreptitious but nevertheless outrageous assault on human freedom by modifying individual behavior through topical psychology. The entire OSS program, as well as the CIA, has always worked on guidelines set up by the Tavistock Institute. And of course, the CIA has old members like Aleister Crowley, certainly is a Satanist, and other people. So we're talking about the crux of the issue here. Tavistock Institute originated the mass civilian bombing raids carried out by Roosevelt and Churchill, purely as a clinical experiment in mass terror, keeping records of the results as they watched the, quote, guinea pigs, end quote, reacting under, quote, controlled laboratory conditions, end quote. All Tavistock and American Foundation techniques have a single goal: to break down the psychological strength of the individual and render him helpless to oppose the dictates of the New World Order.
Well, that's what we were just talking about before, isn't it? Why doesn't anyone stand up and do anything about anything? There you go. Thanks to Tavistock.
Thanks to Tavistock. There you go. Any technique which helps to break down the family unit and family inculcated principles of religion, honor, patriotism, and sexual behavior is used by the Tavistock scientists as weapons of crowd control. And as we said last week, those are the techniques also that they're going to use to persuade us that the Luciferian doctrine is the one we should follow. We tried to warn about that last week. So, from what we've read so far, pretty much all of the satanic agenda seems to be, and the New World Order agenda seems to be radiating, at least through Tavistock.
Which is right next door to the Hampstead, well, maybe not next door, but in the same neighborhood as the Hampstead school that these children are suffering satanic sexual abuse.
Amazing coincidence. Amazing. You'd
Well,
never.
There are no coincidences.
There are no coincidences. The methods of Freudian psychotherapy induce permanent mental illness in those who undergo this treatment by destabilizing their character. The victim is then advised to, quote, establish new rituals of personal interaction, end quote. That is, to indulge in brief sexual encounters, which actually set the participant adrift with no stable personal relationships in their lives, destroying their ability to establish or maintain a family. Tavistock Institute has developed such power in the U.S. that no one achieves prominence in any field unless he has been trained in behavioral science at Tavistock or one of its subsidiaries.
Wow, can we just stop for a minute and take that in?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we know they've been trying to destroy the family. But boy, back in the 60s when, you know, it was free love for all, they started on this changing the morality and taking people away from the family-based units to
Into the
kind of like adrift in a sea of...
It's kind of anti-family. We talked about last week. The basic unit of any society is the family. It raises the children. It gives them moral character, which creates the moral character of the society. So you want to preserve that unit. You want to create situations that they have incentive to stay together. They have incentive to raise the children correctly. That's really important. But Tavistock and these devils that we're talking about don't have that in mind. I also think that this Traumology is there under. That's how they do mind control. We've talked about MK Ultra and how they traumatize children into having split personalities, so they can control them. I'm sure that's been done to all of us.
Yes, in public school.
In public school.
You know yourself, you were traumatized from a very early age just by having to go to school at the age of 4.
Right, and how many people are traumatized by college, graduate school, medical school? That medical school, talk about traumatizing mind control. They traumatize those poor interns. They can't think. They're not supposed to think.
They don't get sleep.
No, they don't get sleep. They're sleep
deprived. You can't live a sane
deprived.
life without
Right.
sleeping.
And how many people do you know that are traumatized by their work life? Oh my God!
Pretty much everyone I know.
Yeah. So it's
It's
working.
endemic in the act of being a human being, but because of Tavistock, not because of natural anything.
No, it doesn't. Life does not have to be horrible. Life does not have to be difficult. Life can be kind of a dream. Certainly you're going to have your little rough roads and your spats, but your job doesn't have to be torture. Public schooling doesn't have to exist. Certainly it doesn't have to be torture if it must exist. So, life could be much better without these little demons. Let me continue.
Go ahead.
Dr. Peter Bourne, a Tavistock Institute psychologist, picked Jimmy Carter for president of the U.S. solely because Carter had undergone an intensive brainwashing program administered by Admiral Hyman Rickover at Annapolis. Through the Standard Research Institute, Tavistock controls the National Education Association, the Institute of Social Research and National Training Lab, brainwashes the leading executives of business and government. Such is the power of Tavistock that our entire space program was scrapped for 9 years so that the Soviets could catch up. The hiatus was demanded in an article written by Dr. Anatole Rapport and was promptly granted by the government to the complete mystification of everyone connected with NASA.
Wow. Well, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I
but-
mean, if you want two sides to compete, you got to level the playing field. And Tavistock apparently wanted them to compete. A single common denominator identifies the common Tavistock strategy: the use of drugs. The infamous MK Ultra program of the CIA, in which unsuspecting CIA officials were given LSD and their reactions studied like guinea pigs, and it resulted in several deaths. The U.S. government had to pay millions in damages to families of the victims, but the culprits were never indicted. Well, they also set up the Institute for Policy Studies to promote drug use, LSD use. The result was the LSD counterculture of the 60s, the Student Revolution, which was financed by $25 million from our friends at the CIA.
Oh, is that where all the free LSD came from?
That's where your purple Osleys were coming from.
Yeah, because there were people who would just like hand out hundreds and thousands of tabs of acid.
Right.
Yeah.
So it kind of backfired in a way. We were having fun, plus we were, I think, expanding consciousness, maybe expanding it in a way, I don't know whether it was a good way or not. One part of the MK Ultra was the Human Ecology Fund. They received large payments from the CIA. And in one study, they received large payments from the CIA to give 53 patients large doses of LSD and record their reactions. The patients were drugged into weeks of sleep and then given electric shock treatments.
Oh my God. Whatever happened to those poor people?
Well, I don't know. All the records of the CIA's drug testing programs were ordered destroyed by the head of MKUltra because all effects of the Tavistock Institute are directed toward producing cyclical collapse. The effect of the CIA programs were tragically apparent. R. Emmett Terrell Jr., writing in the Washington Post, August 20, 1984, cites the squalid consequences of the 60s radicals and SDS. Now, the SDS also is a CIA creation, as resulting in the growing rate of illegitimacy, petty lawlessness, drug addiction, welfare, VD, and mental illness. So that's the kind of products that your Tavistock Institute is producing in our society. Today, the Tavistock Institute operates on a $6 billion a year network of foundations in the U.S., all of it funded by U.S. taxpayer money. Your tax dollars at work.
We're paying for our own enslavement.
Programs to increase the control of the world order over the American people. The Stanford Research Institute, adjoining the Hoover Institution, is an $150 million a year operation with 3,300 employees. It carries on program surveillance for Bechtel, Kaiser, and 400 other companies and intensive intelligence operations for the CIA. It's the largest institution on the West Coast promoting mind control and behavioral sciences. I don't know whether you remember, but Bechtel is the company that bought all the water rights from Bolivia.
Oh, right.
Right.
So the poor people in Bolivia can't even afford to have drinking water.
No, they had to pay for the water they collected from their roofs when it rained.
I remember hearing about that. It's just sick.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
Luckily, the Indians were strong enough, the Indians, I call them the indigenous, were strong enough to throw them out and elect a government that was more on their side.
That's right. I remember now.
Right. So Bechtel didn't back off on its own. One of the principal but little-known operations of the Rockefeller Foundation has been its techniques for controlling world agriculture. Its director, Kenneth Wernemont, set up the Rockefeller-controlled agricultural programs throughout Mexico and Latin America. The independent farmer is a great threat to the New World Order because he produces for himself and because his produce can be converted into capital, which gives him independence. In Soviet Russia, the Bolsheviks, if you remember, in the beginning we started talking about the Bolsheviks, what Tavistock did, they created the Bolshevik Revolution, which set this whole thing in place. The Bolsheviks believed they had attained total control over the people. They were dismayed to find their plans threatened by the stubborn independence of the small farmers, the kulaks. Stalin's got to be either Satan himself or first cousin, ordered that the OGPU seize all food and animals of the kulaks to starve them out. In the Chicago American, February 25, 1939, carried a front-page headline, 6 million perish in Soviet famine. Peasants' crops seized. They and their animals starved. To draw attention from this atrocity, it was later alleged that the Germans, not the Soviets, had killed 6 million people, the number taken from the Chicago American headline by a Chicago publicist.
Oh, that's where the 6 million people figure came from.
Right. Well, I think it was originally in a novel. Then it was in the Chicago article. But the killer of the 6 million people is Stalin. And Stalin was financed by, of course, the Rockefeller Institute. Bolshevik Revolution was orchestrated by the Tavistock. And 6 million people. Now, these people were, you have to remember, they were starved to death. These are people living on independent farms, small farms throughout the countryside. They have their cow, they have their, they're just living a simple life. Stalin took away their livestock and took away their tools, forbid them to grow anything. So they sat there and starved.
It sounds quite familiar, doesn't it? I mean, that's what's happening in the United States today from the news that I'm reading. People are not being allowed to farm their own lands. People aren't allowed to catch their own rainwater. They can't grow gardens.
Right.
It sounds eerily familiar. Probably a product of the Tavistock Institute.
So are you getting the connection between the Tavistock Institute, CIA, Satanism, these horrible things that they've created?
I am.
And just as you said, Mindy, in the United States, the foundations are presently engaged in the same type of war of extermination against the American farmer. The Brookings Institution, this is another one of the Tavistock puppies, and other foundations originated the monetary programs implemented by the Federal Reserve System to destroy the American farmer. A replay of the Soviet tragedy in Russia with the one proviso that the farmer will be allowed to survive if he becomes a slave worker to the giant trusts. Remember the guy we met a long time ago that was going back to the United States to work in, I think it was Nebraska or somewhere in the Midwest. He drove a tractor on these huge farms.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, what did you ask him? You asked him if they used organic seeds. And he almost fell over laughing.
That's right.
He says, there are no such thing as organic seeds. These farmers, they only use GMOs. So, yeah, it hits pretty close to home.
All right, well, this might be a good time to take a quick break and absorb all this information and catch our breath and come back on the other side. What do you say?
Right, that sounds good. Hi, welcome back to The World Beyond Belief. I'm glad you stuck with us through this. This is pretty interesting, pretty scary, pretty all-encompassing, and if you're not reevaluating your reality right now, you probably should go back and review part one. I don't know. It had us reviewing everything that we thought of last night, and we were heavy into a conversation about this. Let me finish off reading this publication about Tavistock. Once the citizen becomes aware of the true role of the foundations, now these are all the foundations that are supported by Tavistock, he or she can understand the high interest rates, high taxes, and the destruction of the family, the degradation of the churches into forums for revolution, the subversion of the universities into CIA cesspools of drug addiction, and the halls of government into sewers of international espionage and intrigue. The American citizen can now understand why every agent of the federal government is against him. The alphabet agencies, the FBI, the IRS, the CIA, and the BATF, must make war on the citizens in order to carry out the programs of the foundations. So it's a battle of good against evil, except evil has this incredible institute where it studies the effects of trauma on people and uses it to control people.
Through worldwide think tanks.
Through worldwide
They're all sitting
think tank.
around in their evil nests plotting against the human race.
That's exactly right.
It's like a really scary movie, isn't it?
It's the
we're living
most
in it.
scary. It's the scariest movie, like K.J. Osborne says.
Yeah.
Scariest movie ever. So now we know about Tavistock and we know what happened in Hampstead. There's a bunch of ways we can look at it. First of all would be the way that probably most people look at it. Yeah, Tavistock just happens to be there, and the people attended classes, and they could have attended cooking classes there. Who knows what they were studying there? They might not have been studying how to make shoes out of baby skins or something like that. They might have been studying something like, I don't know, behavioral psychology in the workplace. I don't know. I go to more sinister, but let's not go there. Let's just do the superficial look. Okay, so it's in the neighborhood. They took some classes there, and some of them are accused of, doing these ritualistic practices with these kids that may or may not be true. Okay. It's one way to look at it. If we go a little more deeper, and I think a little bit more logically, you have to realize that Tavistock is part of the community, and the community attends things in the Tavistock. Tavistock is connected with the community or the people in the community. What happened there was a satanic ritual abuse that happened every week.
And is still happening.
It's still happening. Very good point. And the reason that they do rituals is to gain strength for the ruling elite, the bloodline families. The bloodline families have to do these rituals so that the demonic entities that control them can gain strength. That seems really logical to me if you know anything about Satanism, if you know anything about that type of ritual, if you know how the government is tied in with Bohemian Grove and that cremation of care ceremony, and Tavistock, how Tavistock has orchestrated these horrible things, LSD studies on people that weren't aware of it, bombing innocent men and women and civilians so that they could see what happens, you know?
It's really sick. But it does bring something up that I was thinking about when you were talking about it in the last half, about discarnate entities, you know, coming into people and working through them. Now, most people haven't lived in the Fringe for as many years as you and I have, but we saw this personally in our travels in Brazil, where we were privy to communities of healers who worked by vacating their bodies so that these spirit entities could come in and work through them to heal other people. So it's not such a stretch for us to envision this, but I would say for most people, this is totally new territory.
Oh, I don't know. Our culture, we go and see psychics. I think more and more in Hollywood, the stars are admitting that they just open up and other entities come in and perform. I think that all of our religions, especially the New Age religions, contacts people on the other side of the carnate-incarnate barrier. I would say for the most part they're contacting entities that don't have their best interest in mind, but might seem to have their best interest in mind.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's becoming more and more of an acceptable thing in the culture to be possessed. What do they call it? They incorporate an entity. They incorporate it. And that's an okay thing to do. I think it's, after being involved with it somewhat, I think it's just the most incredibly stupid and dangerous thing you can do, is going into that realm, because there is so much evil lurking just outside. Unless you're protected by some other entity that you know, and you're assured of that, I think it's very dangerous. But anyway, they do these horrible things in these rituals. But normal human beings, I know when I was a kid, we used to play, and we'd play with worms sometimes. I know, I was a little retarded child who stayed home most of the time. And we would cut them in half to see what they would have. Because supposedly they had, a head on both ends or something. I don't know what this lore was. And that they would grow the other end back. But I can remember after doing that, not to a massive amount of them, like one or two, just feeling really shitty about it.
Uh-huh.
Because you were doing
Good.
it.
I'm glad you felt shitty after you did that.
But these people,
I don't think they feel shitty after they even cut babies' heads off.
They're wearing the leather baby shoes around.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, those are the things that I think most people would pull away. The superficial view where these are just, that you'd see on mainstream, that these are just unrelated things and shut up and go away kind of thing. Or two, putting them all together to see how they obviously work together. Tavistock in the community, the satanic ritual abuse in the community, and the amazing cover-up. That, to me, that's the most indicting thing. The fact that it's covered up by everybody, the judicial system, the police, child protective services, the church, the education system, it's all covered up by those people. So you know there's a lot of collusion.
Yeah. It's unbelievable.
All right. So we talked about what most people might see with this. Let's go deeper into the fringe. Let me speculate on what could be going on, and this is really deeply into the fringe, and I'm just taking a pot shot at what might be occurring. I've heard it said that Hampstead might be a town like Sandy Hook, Connecticut. Sandy Hook, Connecticut, obviously, if you look into it very deeply, is kind of a ringer town. They have a satanic church in that town. They have a Masonic lodge in that town. And I would bet that there are deep connections to the Church of Satan. Look what happened there. They were able to put together the falsification of killing 36 kids, frame someone, pull this whole giant psyop off. I think there's only one thing that I think that could tie them together that tightly. Well, I guess there's three things. One is there's lots and lots of money, and I'm sure they get paid lots and lots of money. Two, threats, threats of death or death to your children. Three, connection with the satanic cult that runs the town. That way everything could be covered up. Everybody could either be bribed or done away with. It's the perfect psyop. I've heard it speculated that there are towns like this all over the United States and all over the world. They're like enclaves of ex-CIA people. Now, you never become an ex-CIA person. You just get into the fold. It's like a bloodline.
You might be an operative for a while, but you can always be reactivated.
Right. And remember, last week, did we read something that said 100 million people might be sleepers?
That's right, we did.
Right, to be activated? Well, they could live. It would make it more comfortable if they all settled in the same locations, in the same little towns. Sandy Hook is a perfect place. And there are a lot of CIA-connected people and actors and actresses, I guess,
right,
in Sandy Hook.
And also, I couldn't help thinking of Laurel Canyon just outside of L.A. because Hampstead, I can't remember what they called it. It's a certain section of Hampstead that's up on a wooded hillside. It sounded so...
Highgate. Is it Highgate?
No, Highgate's on the other side of it. It's like Hampstead... it started with an H. It's a very English name, so I didn't really...
Hills?
No. It's like in England they have names for different types of landscapes, like the Coombe, which is a wooded valley, and this is like a wooded knoll or hillside. But anyway, it sounded so familiar, like the description of Laurel Canyon.
Right. I don't know whether you're familiar with Laurel Canyon, but Laurel Canyon... Well, it's a long story, but it's a community that's located around a military, kind of a semi-secret military base. And that's where the CIA created the hippie movement.
Right, and all the rock and roll stars of the late 60s and 70s lived there.
Not to mention Charles Manson and a lot of the satanic movement down there.
So anyway, I got you off track.
Not very much. Well, back to Hampstead. Now that could be one of those ringer towns too, where it could be almost all CIA, MI6, MI5. They could be Satanists. all staying there. I mean, that could be one. It could be one of the enclaves where these people live, and of course, doing rituals certainly would be natural if everybody in your community had this kind of background.
Right, like-minded people like to kind of stick together and live in the same areas. And they all have a lot of money, and it sounds like a very exclusive part of London.
Yeah, I think you'll find that money goes with these people.
Right.
Right. Where you find, I mean, I don't mean a little money. I mean a shitload of money. So that's one thing. It may be a sleeper town, and we just got a little peek into what's going on with it. And it'll go back under the rug, just like Sandy Hook went back under the rug. And there's probably hundreds of these communities throughout the world where people from intelligence services, because you never leave the intelligence services, move in near one another so they can do their practices.
Right,
So
they
they
don't
can,
have to be quite as careful about keeping their identities secretive.
plus, they probably don't have pasts. You know, they're probably all just a bunch of people who are living kind of a nouveau existence, like the one that they gave them after they did 3 of these assassinations, and they were,
Right. They don't really intermingle too much because they all have huge mansions on big
Right.
estates, and they might run into each other at the grocery store, the dry cleaner.
right.
Yeah.
Now, one caveat: I'm totally convinced that there are bureaucrats all over the place, even in the CIA or the FBI, who might be legitimate people operating on the behalf of America or Great Britain.
Could be.
Could be.
Seems kind of unlikely
See-
right now from what we're hearing about.
Right.
But there could be.
Okay. So that's one idea.
Okay.
Let me take you a little bit deeper, even than this. Let's pretend, and we don't have to pretend very much, that Tavistock has orchestrated pretty much of our reality up to this time.
Okay.
I mean, it gave us World War II, the good war. My father died after fighting in that war, well, long after fighting in the war. But he was really convinced that he was on the winning side and he did a great thing.
Right. He was buried in his uniform. He was really proud of his military service.
That's right. But you come to find out that the war was financed by the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Fords, and they profited from the war all along. The different sides were created probably by the think tank at Tavistock. Oh, there's the Americans, they're the good guys, and the Russians, they'll fight on our side, and the Germans are the bad guys, even though, this is just a fictitious way of presenting this thing. Now, did horrible things happen? Oh my God, horrible things happened.
Right.
Were really real people killed? Did they use real bullets? Yeah. But the whole thing was an orchestrated sham.
Staged. Like that movie Wag the Dog.
Exactly, like Wag the Dog. So you have these things, if you keep that in mind, and then, close to Bindi and I is the hippie movement, which is the Aquarian conspiracy. We got totally sucked into that.
It followed right into the New Age deception
Right, that we've
been living
in and out of the
up
whole
till
time.
No,
Okay.
up till recently.
The destruction of the family. Both of us have divorces.
Right, our families are spread out all over the world. We don't even get to be together or see each other very much.
Right.
That's all part of it.
Yeah, we're all mind control victims of Tavistock.
Mm-hmm.
So let's continue that idea
Okay.
that Tavistock is still in control of our perception, and that this Hampstead thing is a psyop as part of the externalization of the hierarchy, maybe? How many of these things will come out before it becomes normal? They've evidently, as you were saying earlier, gotten people to react not as an angry mob, but as a compliant, complacent jellyfish. and they're testing our reaction. They'll throw, actually the most cutest, most beautiful, well-spoken, intelligent kids I've ever seen in front of us, having been raped, going through horrible tortures. I mean, what's going to take to get the human compassion in us to stand up and do something? I think Tavistock might be testing us.
Ooh, I bet you're right.
It's just an idea, and we're walking in the fringe here. I have no way to prove this. I'm just speculating. I mean, if you figure that they've controlled pretty much of our reality up to this date, things that they haven't controlled is, your love for your mother, or, your relationship with your puppy dog, or Tavistock might have had some influence. But anything that had to do with your money, your government, your allegiance, your patriotism, your knowledge of what's going on, your perspective of reality, the size of your perceived reality is totally controlled by them.
Oh, absolutely.
I know people that realities are so small that Tavistock is incredibly,
responsible for how small they are.
How small they are.
Because I don't
do a
think
good
that's
job.
the natural human condition. I think the natural human being, untampered with, would be huge. I mean, their sense of self would be huge. Their perception, the size of their perception of reality would probably be infinite in a natural state.
Oh, I think so. And even in their human body experiencing life, their natural repulsion to what went on and what these kids, they made shoes out of the babies' skins, for crying out loud. So this is repulsive. How long would it take before normal people in the 1860s, would start lighting those torches? You go up this way, you go up that way, yeah, let's go, let's get...
Yeah.
But Tavistock knows. They've been doing their job since then. Nothing's going to happen. They could get into court. Well, what's going to happen in court? The judge is probably in on it.
Right.
So nothing's going to happen. So, just like the hypersexualization of children is now normal.
They've ramped it up so much. I mean, how much more horrible and absurd can it get than this?
Well,
I just can't see it getting worse. I mean, when are people going to actually react?
right.
When are they going to stop their defense of saying, I don't believe it? You guys are just nuts.
Right. Well, and also there's this big thing of moral relativism going in.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's not really right. Having sex with children is really, like it's a lifestyle choice.
Oh, they're so cute. I could see how you would want to have sex with them.
Yeah, it's a lifestyle choice.
Yeah.
I like goats. That's my lifestyle choice. Meh. I mean, it's moral relativism. You can't get any crazy.
Moral relativity. That is, you're 1/4 of the way to Satanism now.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
With just that alone.
So I thought that was way out. Oh, let's go way out. Let me just throw this in there, and this is just something I heard. It's like a rumor kind of thing. But you know how the House of Parliament, we used to watch the House of Parliament do their business. And it was amazing to an American because in the United States, in the Congress, they were all so civil, and they would, one would get up and talk and another would get up and talk. And occasionally they'd make disparaging remarks about one another to one another, and that would be it. But if you've ever seen the English Parliament at work, they get up and scream, and they holler at one another, and they call one another. I mean, it's like a free-for-all. It's so refreshing. It's the coolest thing I've ever seen. But I've heard it said that the reason that they're so agitated and aggressive and fiery in that is because right underneath the Parliament building is an underground network an underground base. And in this underground base, there are a lot of entities that are evil. You could read Dracos into that. You could read demons. You could read whatever. And that's just hearsay. Well, Hampstead, the Tavistock Institute is, of course, in London, and Hampstead is, I think it's part of North London, isn't it? No, I don't know.
Not sure.
But anyway, I mean, the whole place.
Is it near the Parliament?
No, it's not.
Oh.
Well, near enough. I mean, it's not.
Well, yeah, I mean, it
100
could
miles
be a
away.
huge civilization
Could be
underground full of reptilians.
Who knows? But anyway, that's as deep as I'm going to go into the Fringe, and
Because we might start losing our listeners.
yeah, we might start.
They might just go, oh, these guys are just way out there.
Right.
They can't be credible.
But if you think we're not credible at all, I want you to listen to an interview by a person named Mel Vey. It's a woman, and she and her husband started an alternative network called CCN, Consciousness Community Network, or something like that. But anyway, she's from England, and she spent some time in Hampstead, and she's very awake and very aware. And I think you might find it interesting, if you're into Fringy, what she thinks about Hampstead, London, England.
Let's listen now.
Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lambermont Weber, and today we're privileged to have a very extraordinary guest, Mel Vey, who is the co-founder, along with her husband, and of CCN, which is an unusual network. It's a collective news network, the Creative Consumer Network. Mel, welcome.
Thank you, Alfred.
And you've come on our program today because, as you know, we've published two articles regarding the events in Hampstead. And I say events because there's a growing kind of urban sociology, criminology, perhaps genocide around them, along with psyops and memes that are growing as well, perhaps. And you had mentioned to me that you and your husband, who co-founded CCN, had occasion to live in the Hampstead area, and you wanted to make some observations. So you have read the release by Anonymous online that we at newsinsideout.com, along with many others, published, and you have seen a lot of the data. So please, could you share with us how it is that you came to live in Hampstead and what your observations were at that time?
Sure. My husband and I had met living in London, and we'd moved out of the Earl's Court area where we'd been living for a couple of years, and we decided to move north into North London. And the Hampstead area is really, really beautiful. And one of the reasons why we decided to settle there was because of the heath. I love walking and I love nature. And we decided that this would be great for fitness. So we actually acquired ourselves an apartment right on the road that sort of leads perpendicular to the heath. And it was called Downshire Hill. We lived at number 4A, Downshire Hill. And almost immediately from when we moved there, I started to notice certain things that, had I the knowledge that I have today, would have made a lot of sense to me. But there were things that went on during the 5-year period that we lived in that area, and we did live in a lot of different addresses throughout that area. And I must just sort of give you an overview of how it's kind of laid out. You've got on the one side, you've got Hampstead, and then you've got this thing called Hampstead Heath, which is just it's a very hilly, up and down, lots of trees, nature reserve area. But I'll get back to that because it's very important. And if you look at it topographically from above, it's in a bit of a triangle shape. So down the one side of this heath, you've got Hampstead. Hampstead Heath is named after Hampstead, of course. And then you've got Highgate, which is on the other side. And Highgate is also very important. In fact, the Hampstead and Highgate kind of pretty much are one and surround this heath area. When we first moved there, one of the things we noticed from some of the people that we met was this distinctive, and I'll give you an example of someone particularly and why this is important. This one woman that we had the misfortune of meeting and dealing with, and I won't get into too much detail. She was a producer for Endemol Productions. Now, Endemol is the company that produces Big Brother. So to give you the link there, now to be a producer of a show like this, you must obviously be, I don't know, indoctrinated or inculcated or initiated into something. Her husband was, or partner, I'm not sure if they were married, was a banker. And she's the kind of person who would call you up and cause drama because she liked to get that energetic suction of you. And afterwards she would say, oh, don't worry, I'm only joking. I just kind of want to see how you reacted. And what I found with cultists is that it's all about energy manipulation. And this is the kind of thing they'll do. They'll torture people to watch them suffer. And this is what I very much felt was happening with this woman. And this is one of the first sort of friends, acquaintances that we had there. We started to notice this pattern in the people that lived around there, which is very odd. And, you know, having traveled a lot, having backpacked through Europe and the Mediterranean, I made friends pretty easily. And all the time we lived there, we actually have no friends, people that we now know from that period of time, from that 5-year period of time, because we struggled to connect or bond. There seemed to be a very distinctive cliques within the Hampstead Highgate area, which also has a large proportion of Jewish people that live there. In fact, Golders Green is on the other side of Hampstead Heath. I said it's like a triangle, it's like three-sided, but Golders Green is the known Jewish area of Hampstead. And we used to go walking on this heath all the time for fitness, and we sometimes would come across some very secluded areas, very secluded, and the only way I can describe what we found there was kind of like stone circles, stones placed in circles, twigs placed like in huts, and looked like there had been something going on, some kind of rituals or ceremonies. There were stone altars as well, just like in the middle of these circles. And very not knowing what I know now, back then, we're talking around from a period of between 2002 till about 2007. I knew even then that there was something. I used to say, this is which I used to joke with my husband and say, this is witchcraft and stuff that's going on here, because just from what I'd seen in films, you know, I could pretty much gather this is something else, that we don't know what this really is all about. But what's interesting is on Hampstead Heath, you also have something called Kenwood House, and a number of very, what I'd call elitist type old style Victorian houses and mansions and castles surrounding this heath. Okay, George Michael has a home right on the edge of the heath. There's a number of very famous television and music industry folk who have homes in this area, and in these Gothic, and I must say, one of the most amazing things about Hampstead is it has some of the most beautiful houses in London, a lot of very Gothic looking castle type things, turrets, and you can be sure anything that's kind of got that kind of Illuminati architecture most likely has some form of ritualized something going on in it. One of the other things which is very interesting to note, of course, as I said, Highgate is on the other side. You have Highgate Cemetery. Now, the road that connects Hampstead to Highgate around the top of the heath has a pub on it called the Spaniards Inn. And this is extremely important because it's one of the oldest pubs in London. The food there is really excellent. But why it is interesting is because this is the place where Abraham Stoker, better known as Bram Stoker, Freemason, wrote his book Dracula. And he based a large proportion of the events in Highgate Cemetery. Now, if you go down the road further go down Swains Lane towards Highgate Cemetery, this is no ordinary cemetery. It's probably one of the creepiest places I've ever seen. In fact, I believe it's one of the most haunted places in London. If you're into that sort of thing, you can look it up on a website. It's rated as one of the top 10 most haunted places in London. I've heard all sorts of stories from eyewitnesses about strange creatures that frequent that place, everything from vampiric-looking creatures to grey creatures to reptilian-looking creatures. In fact, there's a part of the cemetery that's closed off that has pyramids, and I'm absolutely positive, and I have heard stories that there are rituals that go on underground, and these pyramids in the closed-off part of the cemetery are actually where people enter into these tombs where they're having these rituals. Now, my honest belief here is, Alfred, is yes, it's a terrible thing what's happened with the schools, and I don't think that it's made up. What I think is this is just what is happening, the same thing with Jimmy Savile, the same thing with all those people who have now been thrown to the public. This is just a distraction from the real darkness and evilness that's going on there and the real kingpin of all of this. That school is not the only school where it's going on. Christchurch is not the only church where that's going on. There's a number of churches in the Hampstead area where I'm absolutely convinced that all this sort of stuff is going on. The Roslyn Hill Church, which has been renovated for years, and it stands right next to the Hampstead Welfare Hospital. I remember one day walking back from the tube station and walking past the church, and they've been renovating it for years, and suddenly they had all these white screens all the way around the church and what looked like guys in forensic masks, they had covers on their face. I thought, did they find toxic waste or something there? And then I spoke to one of the nurses at the hospital, and she said that they actually found bodies under the church that had, ritualistically been killed, children, all sorts. And, when they'd been renovating the church, they'd obviously uncovered this big pile of bodies. And there's a lot of strange deaths that happen in Hampstead. For example, as I said, I lived at number 4A, Downshire Hill, just slightly further down at number 8 when I was living there. And this is a big mansion of a house, is number 8. There was a man who lived there who was killed. And when we asked how he was killed, and there was a police officer standing outside, he wasn't saying anything, but the neighbors were saying he was tortured to death in his own home. It's a lot of strange murders. There's always bodies being found on the heath. A very famous Vogue photographer was found in the ladies' swimming pools, I think it was in 2013. And this is a common thing, dog walkers finding bodies all over the heath. It seems to be a dumping ground. So there's something going on there. Whether the school is it or just a symptom of a much bigger problem, this is what I believe, but there is something going on in that place. Oh, there's one more thing that's probably of great interest. And as I said, I lived in Downshire Hill Road, and what I found very interesting, I didn't know what the Freemasons were at the time, but we had a pub on the corner of Downshire Hill Road called the Freemasons Arms. Now, this place actually had what looked like the ground level, the top part of the pub, which is all beautiful old English pub, wooden, big fireplaces, really good food. And then there was a downstairs area where there was said to be a 200-year-old skittle alley, which we were never, ever able to access. But we had seen people going into the basement part, and I'm absolutely convinced that that was a Freemasons meeting house because it's called the Freemasons Arms. So there is a lot of very interesting stuff about this area. And I don't think that what's happened at the school is isolated by any measure of means. In fact, I think this coming out is just a symptom of a much bigger problem, and possibly, you know, I know how it has come out. I know the woman who has done all of this expose. I think that the fact that she's still alive and she's able to talk about this is absolutely amazing. But I really don't think this is it. I think it's much deeper than what they're saying.
Right. Now you've read the document that Anonymous put out, and it's fairly explicit. It says East Finchley swimming pool is amongst other meeting spots for satanic pedophile ring. The members of the ring attend swimming sex sessions, satanic ritual, blood sacrifice. The ritual is performed in an upstairs room in McDonald's on Mondays and Fridays. Do you think that that's credible? That document from what you know from that area?
Well, here's something that I found very ironic. That's the Jewish belt, Hampstead, Highgate, Golders Green, the Jewish belt. It was actually a Jewish man who told me that they take the bodies of children that they've killed in their Talmudic rituals and they put them into McDonald's burgers. Isn't it ironic now all of a sudden that McDonald's is playing a part in this? Okay, so I don't think there's any coincidence there. There is another very interesting thing, which I think for me is a piece de resistance about what Hampstead Heath really is. There's a place on Hampstead Heath called Parliament Hill. And basically Parliament Hill overlooks south over London. And you can see all the way to Crystal Palace from Parliament Hill. It's called Parliament Hill because this is where they used to hold Parliament. Now, you've done a lot of research, Alfred. You know, on hills, this is where it used to be where sacred sites of ritual were, and it's been proven as well that governments and ruling people used to meet at these ritual sacred sites, and this is where parliaments and stuff were formed. And I actually don't think that Parliament Hill is a natural hill. I think it's a burial mound because there's tons of these things all over, the UK. All sorts of these things. Anywhere you find crop circles and stone circles, you'll find these sort of like Salisbury Mound. And I think this could be one of these ritualistic burial mounds. If not, it certainly has been used for all sorts of rituals and things in the past because all these sort of things were always done on the top of hills. They're believed to be close to the heavens or God or whatever it was. But it is probably one of the focal points of this heath is this massive hill which overlooks the whole of London. And the fact that it's called Parliament Hill alludes exactly to its function, what it became, what it evolved from. And for me, it says a lot about what that area is actually really all about.
Right. At our news portal, we get comments on, for example, the release of the anonymous document by people that will say, "Oh, this is false. This is absolutely false. This is not occurring. If this were occurring, the parents would be in front of the school. They would be protesting. The medical authorities would have examined the children medically to determine if their, physical parts had been abused or disturbed." What is your assessment as to people's letters like this?
Well, to be honest with you, in an ideal world, we'd like to believe that when there is an injustice, that there will be those who will do the right things, do the examinations, take the evidence and follow through on it. This is how we would like to believe the world works. But it doesn't work that way often. If it did, you and I wouldn't be doing what we do. Okay? Simple fact is that that in order to be in a position of power, there has to be a certain amount of corruptibility about you. Otherwise, you just don't get there. Whatever the corruptibility is, whatever that fallible or that flaw is that they hook into, whether it be, you have a penchant for fiddling with little kitties, or perhaps you like a bit of crack cocaine, or whatever it is, they will find what it is, and that's what they hook into. Perhaps, you have an ego and you like money and women, and they will find that thing, and that is what they will play to manipulate you and get you to do what they need to do and manipulate you into those positions of power, and you just don't get there unless you're playing that game. So, yes, all those authorities are supposed to come and help. It would be nice. But let me tell you, I lived in London, and I sued 3 different companies for what I believe was various degrees of sexual harassment. And every time I lost. And then I actually spoke to someone who had been doing these kind of claims for a long time, and she said only 3% of all women who put sexual harassment claims in the workplace forward to the employment tribunals actually come out, come out having it won in their favor. There's more of a chance of them just sweeping it under the carpet and somehow finding a way for it to become socially acceptable. If only 3% of women who bring sexual harassment charges actually win their cases, what does that say about the society we're living in? And that's what I very much found when I was living in London, is that there is a very subtle, subversive attempt to put, to play forward a very underhanded, malicious, malevolent degradation of people. It's almost subversively okay for this kind of thing to go on, because they don't really prosecute it if only 3% of people are having that kind of thing go on. If only 3% of people bringing those cases forward, any kind of sexual harassment case, actually have the claim end in their favor, it means that they're more likely to look the other way for these things. This is the point I'm trying to make. So if that can, I'm just using from my own experience, knowing what I know about the way it works and having lived in London for a long time and seeing the way things go down there, it doesn't surprise me at all, because there is a lot of cognitive dissonance. This stuff is so horrific that I imagine a lot of mummies and daddies in Hampstead don't want to imagine this is going on. The nice ones, that is. And to be honest with you, in the 5 years I lived there, I didn't find any that I liked. It's almost like within certain communities, even within big cities, there is a clique. It's something just beneath the perception of everybody, because it's unspoken of. It's kind of only known between those who are involved in it. And you don't get, in order for them to get away with this, they have to have everybody in the bag, from the police officers to the nurses, the doctors, and and then there's the Royal Free Hospital, which is the hospital in Hampstead. Let me tell you, there is so much that goes on there that is also very questionable. That I think, at some stage we need to bring that into account and into full transparency. But I can only imagine that there would be people working there, the doctors and nurses, who would potentially be called upon to examine these kids, who potentially would also be in on the whole thing,
Right. So to answer these critics who have been writing in and say that the whole thing is implausible, in the case of Hampstead, where you have the schools, the municipality, in other words, all the facilities, the police, the social services, the health, the hospitals, even the local newspapers and media are captured by this network, then there may well be children who have reported to their parents who have tried to get satisfaction from the school or satisfaction from the police or social services, and they end up losing their child, which is what happened to the mother here. And they didn't have videos that got released to the internet, so we don't know. I.e., what you're validating is that yes, this is going on, and you don't need, and you're showing why it is that parents aren't parading outside. So good. So you've answered these letters of doubters from around the world that are writing in.
Well,
Right.
I think that there does actually need to be a few people kicking off, anonymous, anybody based in London, get on the Northern Line, get off at Hampstead, and go out and protest outside the school. Make a noise, make it public. Get into the high street with banners and get in everybody's faces. Hampstead High Street's one of the really poshest high streets. It's beautiful. Right? The shops there are all very expensive, and the restaurants are lovely. And get out there with banners and make a noise about this stuff that's going on in your communities. I think the only way that we can put pressure on people to do something about it is to raise awareness within the communities. And I'm an optimist. I don't believe that everybody's bad. I believe that there would be some people within Hampstead and Highgate and Golders Green and that whole area who would be absolutely appalled and shocked at what is going on. I don't believe that, these satanic circles are sometimes quite exclusive. They don't include everybody. There are people on the outer who this would mortally offend. And it's to those people we need to reach out and say, don't just go, we'll leave it to somebody else to handle, because those people that you trust to handle it are probably in on it as well. It really is up to the citizens to get out there and make a noise and bring awareness to this. I mean, this is an amazing whistleblower moment about the sort of thing that's going on. And I'm sure that Hampstead is not the only place in London that this sort of thing is happening.
Yeah, taking into account her information, it really seems like a spooky place, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Sounds like a place where Tavistock and witches' covens would be happening.
Satanic rituals, schools, public, I don't know if it's public or private, but schools with sex orgy rituals, killing babies in them. How much creepier can it get?
Well, they did it in the churches.
And in the churches, and in the McDonald's.
It's Starbucks.
Yeah. Well, they didn't do the rituals there, but apparently they prepared the babies for food there.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's happening, and we kind of during this program wanted to look at different ways you could look at this thing, and also the connection with Tavistock is unbelievable. I mean, that is the total mind control center of the world. It's created our reality. It's like if we're the movie, it's the projection booth,
That's right. Yeah, this has been one of those weeks that's be careful what you ask for, because we keep going deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole, and the more we find out, the more we realize how little we really know about what's happening in the world.
Right. The whole idea of England also is I think interesting. I think that northern France, the UK, including Ireland, are all very magical places.
Indeed, they are, with all the stone circles and the megaliths and the...
Oh, the little people, the fairy people, the round table, the Knights of the Round Table. It's all very mystical and magical up there.
And it's misty, so it does...
It's misty.
Yeah. I mean, you know how the spirits like to live in the smoke and the fog.
Right.
It's a very mystical place. But, you know, I like to think of mystical as being kind of good stuff. But this is just pure
Well,
evil.
you know what we learned about energy centers long ago. They're
Right.
just energy, and they could be used for good or bad. I mean, if you take, remember we went to the one place?
Yeah.
We went to a place in Pennsylvania. There was a high energy center. It was,
It was on
Lilydale.
Vortex, Lilydale, New York.
Right. It was on a vortex. Definitely.
Hmm. And the energy was so intense there. It was a town that psychics lived in. And it was so crazy that we started getting really agitated and like arguing and annoyed with each other. And our dog, who was with us, he's normally so sweet and loving, but he just got really aggressive.
Yeah.
And
that's
so we left early because we were in such a bad mood. We needed to get out of there. And literally at about 10 minutes out of the town, we were back to normal.
right.
That's how intense that energy was.
But let's look at the British Isles in northern France, and even in the Jerseys. What's going on over there, and what has been going on? I mean, northern Scotland, they have huts where ancient peoples used to go in and strum bows, and were able to get themselves out of their bodies. I mean, it might have
They
been.
were stone, cone-shaped structures made out of stone with an opening in the top, so that your spirit could ascend out your crown chakra and
Right.
out the top of these cone-shaped buildings where they
So
could
bef-
tone.
So before the satanic influence that's happening now, well, and then you look at the Celtic Empire. The Celtic Empire was much bigger than the Roman Empire. You don't hear about it because it's not taught in school. It's not part of your. It's part of the lost world before we got in deeply into the Kali Yugas and the heavy materialistic stuff. But there have been mummies of tall, 6 foot plus, blonde-haired, red-haired people with, get this, plaid outfits on, found in China. So the Celtic Empire, which I assume generated from the British Isles, was probably bigger and more powerful, although I'll bet you it was more benevolent than the Roman Empire or any of the empires that followed.
Mm-hmm.
And they were probably using the energy that comes out of those things. Well, and also look at the dolmens and the megaliths all around that area. There's megaliths. There's one megalith that we saw. It had fallen over, but it weighed as much as the Statue of Liberty. So how could they do that? Well, they're harnessing power. They're harnessing a different kind of power, I think.
Well, you actually write about that in your book, Belief Magic.
Right.
There's a really cool chapter towards the end of the book on magic, and you go into a lot of that stuff. So if you're interested in that topic, pick up a copy of that.
Yes,
You'll
it's
love
good.
it.
Also, look what's happening there now. There's crop circles that happen all over the world, but I'd say the preponderance of them happens in the British Isles, in the British
Right.
countryside.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Stonehenge, and then there's Adbury. And then, don't you wonder why the royals live there?
Yeah, they could live anywhere in the world.
They can live anywhere in the world. Now, you say it's because they're British. Well, actually, they're not British. They're German. They changed their names
It was
to...
Habsburg, wasn't it?
yeah, they've changed their names to,
Windsor.
Windsor, to be more English. And they live there. I would imagine that's a source of power, and Tavistock, which that started in London,
Mm-hmm.
is part of that whole milieu. So anyway, let's keep our mind open. Let's stay on this Hampstead thing, because let's see what happens to it.
Right, and if this can be exposed, maybe it could bring down the whole control system, and maybe our whole experience of life could just shift, like in the flick of a horse's tail, into a paradise, once we get rid of these.
Right, that was my original
controlling
premise, and then I think we
forces.
got to where it was going to be it it was probably a Tavistock psyop that was perpetrated in a village that was a CIA, what would we call them? Well, it's like a coven.
Yeah.
The whole
I was going to
city.
say enclave, but coven's more descriptive.
Yeah. So we'll keep you up to date on that, but we've got some exciting programs coming up. We've got some really cool interviews coming up. You want to tell them about the interviews?
Sure. This week we're going to be interviewing a health minister, and she's got some amazing stuff to tell us about MMS and all kinds of actually real practical hands-on tips that we can use to heal ourselves. So in this day and age, this is really crucial information that we all need, and she's fascinating. So we're looking forward to that interview. And Ole's going to be back with us next week. We'll be interviewing Ole again, and he's back from a trip to Sweden and Denmark too, I think, where he was doing some tours on the anniversary of the assassination of the Prime Minister. And also, we might be shortly coming up with an interview with Seven, who's a fascinating woman that you'll all really want to get to know and hear her story. We don't really have time to go into her story too much right now. You'll just have to wait and see, but tune in for that one. It's going to be fabulous. And then you were going to do a podcast on...
Oh, yeah. Information is piling up on medical terrorism in the U.S. between the forced vaccinations and the massive death that it's causing. The medical system, including the pharmaceutical system, is causing massive amounts of deaths and massive amounts of fear and massive amounts of coercion. I don't know what characterizes terrorism more than the medical system in the U.S. It's amazing. So we'll put our thoughts together on that and come back at you pretty soon on that one.
Right. So busy times ahead, and there's so much going on. So keep your eyes open and your ears open and your minds open, most importantly, because it just
keeps getting weirder
and weirder.
H.S. Thompson, what was his name?
Hunter S. Thompson.
Hunter S. Thompson says it just keeps getting weirder and weirder.
Oh boy, if he was still alive today, he'd really be fascinated with what's going on.
Yeah.
If he
I wonder
wasn't
what he
part of
knew
it.
about 911. That's why he was killed, you know.
Is that right?
Yeah, he knew too much.
Figures.
Okay, well, that's about it for The World Beyond Belief this episode.
Thanks for tuning in, and tune in again next time. And meanwhile, be nice to each other and stay well.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.